Welcome everyone. Thank you for coming to the Whangarei Art Museum. It's wonderful to present this panel discussion with these guests here. We're very grateful for their attendance. This is a fabulous opportunity to discuss Jo Hardy's artwork as the exhibition closes. It's been an honour and a privilege to hang her artwork and to hear all of the stories and share the anecdotes about all of her paintings in her life. So, my name is Ruth. I'm the director and curator of the Whangarei Art Museum. There'll be an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the discussion. We've got some preset themes and topics to talk about, and I'll introduce each of the speakers and they can share how they know about Jo and their relationship with Jo. So first on my right is Andrea Hopkins, painter. And your mic should be on.
And it is, yes, hello. Andrea Hopkins, mostly painting, but not at the moment. Knew Jo for a few years, but more not like somebody whose house I went to and learnt from painting, but somebody who I learnt some life lessons about how to be a woman painter and what those, we had drinks and whatnot and food and things, and kia ora.
Thank you, Andrea. Next is Barry Squire.
Hi, I knew Jo for a little while, from about 1990 onwards. She was a mentor, a painter for me, a colleague. We played music together, we had fun together. We talked, argued, that's how it is, with Jo. And we were friends. Thanks.
Thank you, Barry. Barry was also Jo's dealer at Hanger Frame and Gallery. Next we have Pete Millington.
Hi. I've known Jo since Giles' first birthday. 81. My partner at the time, Whangarei, and myself went to Giles' birthday party, and I expected lots of kids running around, and when we got there, there was Jo and Mark, Paul Pritchard and Nancy Pritchard, sitting around the kitchen table, playing poker, drinking whiskey and smoking joints, and 3 kids running around the lounge. Anyway, that was my introduction to Jo. She was the most amazing friend that I'll ever have, and I miss her every day.
Thank you, Pete. Next we have Ron Brownson.
Kia ora everyone, I'm Ron Brownson, Senior Curator of New Zealand Art at Auckland Art Gallery, Tua Tamaki. I met Jo Hardy in 1977 with our mutual friend Christopher Saunders, who was a landscape architect. And I didn't, unfortunately, experience all the imbibation that Peter, etc., have had with Jo. But what I did share with Jo, I think, in the late 70s and early 80s, was a huge respect for her talents as a visual artist and for someone with an incisive intellect and an astonishing sense of humour.
Thank you, Ron. So the format for this afternoon is that I will introduce an idea or a topic or a question, and I may direct that at an individual or out to the group, and it's meant to be a fluid conversation where we share thoughts and knowledge about Jo's painting and her life. So the first question, I guess, is what made Jo decide to move to Whangarei, to Northland? And I'm just putting that out there to probably Barry or Pete, maybe.
As far as I know, it was the influence of Yvonne Rust, and I can't remember how they first met, but when Yvonne came up here from having run the Christchurch pottery studio, she came up here, and those girls just followed. that's as far as I know as it happened. Anybody else?
So maybe could you talk a little bit about the relationship between Stephanie Sheen and Joe Hardy and Yvonne Russ? Was it more a collegial relationship, or would you say that it was mentor-student?
Yvonne Rust had such a work ethic that it rubbed off on anybody that was associated with her, and with Joe and Stephanie, it certainly rubbed off. They were devoted painters, and with just that little encouragement, they were avid. You know. So I think it was a mentor, a friend.
I'll just add something to Peter's really accurate comment, I think, which is this. Yvonne was someone who believed that being an artist meant that you were not ever a hobbyist, that you actually did art every single day, Monday to Friday, 365 days a year. Wouldn't you say, Peter? Yeah, that was it.
Yeah. But that's funny, mentioning the word hobbyist. When Yvonne's, this is not Joe, this is Yvonne, but when Yvonne came to put a tax return in, her accountant said, you're going to have to declare all your works that you've sold, and she said, oh, I don't really want to do that. And he said, well, the only other thing you can do is declare yourself as a hobbyist. Which she did. Yeah.
She also referred to her practices as a bit like being a nun, so there's that dedication there, that everyday aspect of painting. Yeah. Pete, did you want to share a little bit about the Tangihuia Dream Company?
Tangihuia Dream Company. That was 1980. Joe and Steph both got together and decided it was going to be an artist collective. They didn't have any particular rules or any, they just decided to get it together. And the people that they had friendships with, Mark Adams, Paul Rossiter, Tony Fomson, Lou Summers, many others, there must have been about 20. They all agreed, and they formed an amorphous sort of group. And then I came along, and I inherited the secretaryship from Stephanie, and we organised a gallery in Clyde Street called the Polite Force Station, and it was going pretty good. 2 or 3 years it went all right, and we sold 10 works in 3 years. But I got a bit overboard and started organising like a Boy Scout group, and you can't do that, not with artists. And so eventually we, about 5 years, 6 years down the line, we threw it in. Mainly my fault, but anyway, it remained an amorphous group. There's that painting there. There's one she did, probably the only one she did of the Polite Force, and that's got a story behind it. Those two people climbing out of the window, that was a strong room, and we didn't have the key. We inherited this building, not inherited it. We rented it, but and then I did it out. And the two people that were climbing out of the window there were locked into that room. We didn't have a key to the strong room, so we just used to prop the door open. And anyway, those people got locked in. Some idiot closed the door, and they had to climb out this very tiny onto that ledge and crawl along the ledge to that window and climb in the other window.
Peter, one of the things that just comes to mind as you're talking about Tangihua Dream Company is that there was quite a number of artists who came from Christchurch or had trained in Christchurch. That was something that was a bonding thing, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Especially Paul and Tony.
The Christchurch contingent was I forget. Paul is here, he might remember. But Rudy
Gopaz.
No, not Rudy Gopaz, the other Rudy. He was a photographer. And Lou Summers. See, I didn't know them very well because I hadn't been down there.
But they had been friends before Whangarei, being in this area.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Prior to my arrival. Yeah.
I came across a poster at Doug Chown's place. It was called Behind the Eye, and I think that poster was dated back to 1978 or 77. And in that poster, some prominent names of the past and leading names of such as Chris Booth was on that. And that was the first exhibition they held outside St. Clair's antique shop in the library on that corner there before it was developed to the Whangarei District Council car park. So they did an open air show. And I think with Stephanie Sheehan and Peter Yates was in that show. Joe, Chris Booth, Alan and Zella Charlton, Doug Chowns, a few other names I can't remember now. That's the first indication I saw from a historical point of view, I caught them. So I think it was 77. And I think Stephanie and Joe came up here in 1976, is that right, Peter?
Yeah.
So looking for the sort of the free and carefree lifestyle of living up in the hills, and I think they pretty well found that, didn't they, Giles, up on Tangihua Road there, in the old villa?
I don't think it was totally carefree.
No, it wouldn't have been. Yeah.
Some freedoms there, I suppose.
Well, I mean, it gave the ability to sort of work on their art and sort of siphon in some of the beautiful atmosphere of where you live.
I think it was cheap as well.
It was cheap. Well, it was definitely out in the boondocks anyway. That's what I know.
Did they pay any money for that?
I think they had a very, very nominal rent.
Yeah.
May have included a bottle of whiskey a year to the landlord. It's back in the hands of the family now.
Yeah.
That house up in the Tangihuas.
They've done it up?
Where the Tangihuas were, the mountain range is where the Tangihua Dream Company got its name. And that's where the house is nestled in the foothills of. It's just an old 100-year-old haunted farmhouse. And that's where they ended up.
There's a mural of your mother's in that house too, is that right?
There's a mural of hers in the house over the road, actually, which belongs to some friends and neighbours. And that's still there. Friends of ours still live there. And it's in good nick. She went there and fixed it up in recent years. So there's still a connection to that first spot in the Tangihuas where she and Dad and others lived when they first came up. And with just regard, I can't get this mic to work, but just regarding this coming up to Northland, I think she was kind of escaping Christchurch and finding a new place to strike out, Mum. And she and Steph and others were trying to do that. They'd tried other places. They'd all kind of disbanded and tried other places. I think Steph had gone to the West Coast. But yeah, Steph had made contact with Yvonne Rust, and it was Steph who said, "Oh, look, that's Stephanie Sheehan. You've got to, meet Yvonne and come up here." And they came up here and lived off her for some time.
Was it 9 months or something?
Something like that, yeah. And I think she fed and housed and clothed them, that whole time until they found somewhere to live. I'm not quite sure how they found the house in Tangihua, but I imagine it was because it was cheap. And that's how they found their way there. Mum had an Arts Council grant of the fantastic sum of about $5,000, I think. And she describes feeling like she was going to be able to live on that for the rest of her life. So she was finding a nice cheap place somewhere in the Wops, and she was going to be a painter and live on this fantastic fortune forever, I think. And that's part of the story.
In terms of the quarry, just a question that came to mind is how much did Joe have involvement in the setting up of the quarry? Because that was sort of early 80s, late 70s that was sort of established by Yvonne, but was Joe involved in that in many ways?
She never really claimed to be involved in the real setup of it initially, but she was sort of there from early times. I mean, I would have been there from age nothing, I think. Or what was it, 82 or something, when it was sort of starting to be called the quarry. I would have been 2, so I'm not remembering this. I don't know. She never really claimed to me that she was involved with the setup so much, but she was there very early on. But that was definitely Yvonne's baby, and it was really Yvonne's sort of mana that drew all those people in around her, and many of them stayed for a long time.
I don't think they were involved because Yvonne's focus on the quarry was the added value to the raw product, and painting wasn't really a part of it. So,
And do you think Joe's work changed in many ways moving up to Northland? I mean, we've got the 1975 piece Vapid Stage, which is the piece that the big loose abstract canvas, well, not completely abstract, has abstract elements, and then we come around the gallery and we have more sort of figurative iconography.
well, I think Joe's work changed, when she got up here, but in those early years, when Stephanie and Joe were working together, their works were very similar. So I think she found her own voice a bit later on.
Yeah, okay.
And especially after Stephanie.
A lot of that did come from the surrounding landscape and the subject she found herself. Subjects she found herself surrounded by. But as you say, I think she, a lot of her technique and that sort of thing was, the foundations for that were laid down, back in Christchurch and at a similar time as Stephanie. But it's sort of where she's been has been a big influence on how they've changed since then.
Yeah. Did you want to say something, Barry?
Yeah, well, I have a painting by Stephanie Sheehan called The Answer, and Joe painted a picture called The Question. And I think they did a lot of psychic jousting, actually, and they played off each other. And I think after a while, from what I heard and what I understand of it, there was a element where they became a bit wary of each other in a way, and there was maybe some professional jealousy playing against each other. And I think it allowed them to create some distance between each other and fully develop their own personal prose. Just my view.
The title, incidentally, of those two paintings comes from the last two sentences uttered by Gertrude Stein when she looked at Alice B. Toklas and said, "What is the answer?" And Alice B. Toklas just was inexpressive. And so Gertrude looked at Alice B. Toklas again and said, "Well, what is the question?" One of the things that's really interesting about this period of the Vapid painting, 75, is that's when the moment there's a tension in New Zealand art, a real tension between the international style of colour field painting, exemplified by people like Ian Scott and Richard Colleen, And the tradition that both Stephanie and Jo most respected, which came through the genealogy of Rita Angus, which is high-end, closely painted, slowly painted studio works based on the notion of realism. And so in that period between 75, 77, 78, both Stephanie and Jo were trying to break the surface of the painting, so they'd often do things like almost paint a split or rent in the canvas, or add things to the canvas so that it became a sculptural item. That was where I saw a lot of tension happening between the two. A creative tension, though, the best tension of close friends.
Very apt.
That sort of brings me to another point, the sort of curious aspect of Jo painting around the edge of the canvas. You know, some would say that by painting around the side, that takes it from the 2D to the 3D. It's very sculptural. Does anyone have any insight on what made Jo do that at all?
She hated frames.
Yeah, I was going to say that. Kia ora, yeah.
And there was that, she always expressed a three-dimensional element, but, you know, edges are important to a painter. When you see a painting being foiled on the edge, it really hurts your feelings. You know, it's like it shows a due lack of care by the owner of the painting. You know, if you see a painting that's in pristine order and all the edges are nice and clean, that's a real sign of respect for painting. I think Jo knew that.
Yeah.
And she really worked it.
She would also often talk about how she'd been taught how to stretch a canvas on a stretcher properly by, I think, was it Quentin McFarlane taught her that. And so I think, you know, that, and as you can see in her paintings, she's very into those sharp edges. So she's already got that by stretching canvas on the stretcher. And, you know, the canvas just goes around there, so why stop at the...
Well, with some artists like her that paints a lot of works, she doesn't want, as if we're looking at a painting at this 45-degree angle, that's a raking angle of observation. If you paint around the edges, you don't get a white line on the wall, you know, or a white line to the edge of the painting. So it's partly the physicality of the object, the painted object as a sculptural form, but it's also something which doesn't disturb the complete totality of seeing it both perpendicular and at an angle.
Also, adding a frame would be a whole other decision.
Yeah.
And a decision which is separate to the work. If, you know, she did add some frames to some paintings. Some paintings she would paint a frame on, and because so she's sort of thinking about that. And she did one work where it was just it was $10 bills stuck to a board, and varnished and with some glittery stars on it, and she put a gilt frame around that, and that was sort of a commentary on. It was called Cheap at Half the Price, I think.
Cheap at half the dozen.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
And it's sort of a commentary on the cost to her of painting and that sort of thing. The frame was important there because the frame was about the act of painting.
That work, which we did not end up hanging in the show, but we did have an opportunity to. Interestingly, what I understand from the owner of that piece is that it was cheaper to paste the money on the cardboard than to buy the paint to make the painting. So that was sort of the other aspect of that work, which was at the time something that Jo would have been outraged by, I'm sure. Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to know a little bit more about some of her influences. Ron, you mentioned Rita Angus and we heard Ian Scott there, but I was thinking more along the lines of music and poetry. Does anyone like to share some insight around Jo's love of those other genres?
The band Can, she always mentioned that quite a lot.
It's funny you should say that. I was about to say that she couldn't believe that I didn't know Tego Mago by Can. Like it was a sign of complete ignorance that I didn't know it.
She liked Bob Dylan and all of the sort of the folk music. In fact, tried very hard to become a musician and play music, along with Peter.
Oh, well, she did very well. She did say that I was her muse. I don't know why. I think Giles bought her a banjo, a ukulele. Did you?
Oh, I don't know if I bought it. It might actually came by way of one anyway.
Yeah.
She decided to start playing it.
Or maybe you bought the second one, I don't know.
Possibly.
Anyway, she took up the ukulele with a gusto, you know, amazing. And she played every day, just for about a half an hour or so, before she went down to the studio. And then she transferred to the guitar, and she made marvellous progress, marvellous. Yeah.
Well, a lot of her
She did
influences were musical. She was, you know, as I was growing up, she was always listening to Bob Dylan and Van Morrison, Astor Weeks in particular, and she would talk about poetry a lot. She was a big Dylan Thomas fan. You know, I live in her house now, and I've inherited all her books, and a lot of them are poetry books. I don't remember her really reading them, but they had a big effect on her, and you know, and you find them in the titles of her paintings and in the text in some of her paintings, that sort of thing. So, although she absolutely had influences who were other painters, musicians and music and poetry was probably equally, if not, you know, equally influential.
She always said that there could have been, we described it as a harmonic convergence, where you have images and sound. They seem to make things come alive even more, you know, when the two relate to each other.
Yeah, very interesting.
Jo was really a maven for the realization that other artistic forms like poetry, like music, can be for a visual artist an extremely powerful motivation and inspiration. I can recall quite clearly her discussing with me the poems, the very short and pithy poems of Emily Dickinson, for instance. I felt a funeral in my brain, that type of title, that type of first line. Or Ursula Bethel from A Garden in the Antipodes. She had a copy of Alan Kerner's 1960, a book of New Zealand verse, and she knew it as well as anyone I've ever met. Her erudition, and please, that is the correct word, her erudition was unbelievably impressive in terms of poetry. One artist I feel, you know, hugely admiring of.
Janet Frame was she was a big fan of Janet Frame's, and I remember her being really honoured when after Janet Frame had died, something she had written about her that had been published in the paper was read out at her funeral, and that was, you know, a big honour to her.
That's interesting. I mean, many of Jo's paintings have, you know, long lyrical titles, so you can definitely see that relationship between language and paint, and also in music and paint as well.
Just look at these words. So I just chose a few words at random just to pick up on that, Ruth. Vapid, pictograms, terra incognita, ether, hazardscape, fantastic, hypnagogic. How many people are going to say that Whangarei today? Oh, this one, Heraeus. You know, language.
Kia ora. I never really separated Jo's how she could craft and shape words in the same way that she could shape imagery. Because at one stage she could lift you up with some hugely unknown word and you'd feel totally uplifted by it, and then in the next minute, and probably after a few whiskies and whatnot, she could turn you to mist in the blink of an eye, you know. She was voracious in the same way that some of her paintings, the symbols, some of them are really tiny, and I go around and have a good look at them because I'm nosy like that, and I try and figure out how she's done them. And you wouldn't see them unless you had a really good look. And that was the same with some of her writing. You wouldn't catch it on the first time round. You'd have to go back for a second, third or fourth read until you got both the surface, the underlying, like the layers of paint that she used. She was meticulous on grammar. The amount of time she jumped on my Facebook page and corrected my grammar. And she'd always apologise, "I'm sorry, Andrew, I don't mean to come down here." I said, "No, someone needs to correct me because no one else will." She was not scared of anyone when it came to painting or the words that she chose. She was exactly her. And I don't think it was necessarily a predetermined thing. She just got to a stage in her life where she thought, "I'm just going to be, this is me." And when she picked up the guitar and started learning it, she knew that she wasn't the best, and she struggled along on A, D, and E for a long time, but she just made sounds. You know, she wasn't she didn't want to go and play with Creed or anything like that. She wanted to be able to craft her words and then be able to put them in a way that made people feel something with the tone of the one string that she was hitting in a certain way backwards, in the same way with her paintbrush. So that's what I got off Jo. Yeah, she sung a flat, but that flat note made you feel something sometimes. And then sometimes she hit that note and it was awesome and it made you feel something. In the same way that every one of these single brush strokes, whether they're matte, textured, bold or subtle, every time you look at it, you'll feel something.
Kia ora, Andrea. We've had a number of people come back to the exhibition multiple times. There's one visitor who we've counted has been here 18 times. It's this sort of, Jo's work is the kind of work that you need to spend a long time with. You find new things, new details. There's some interesting icons or imagery that seem to travel throughout her entire body of work. We've got road cones and we've got tents and we've got lots of other different types of imagery. And I wondered if anyone had any sort of ideas about why Jo perhaps used icons that travelled through the body of work rather than maybe just focusing on something for a little while. What's the fascination with, say, the rocket ship and the road cone?
I think she just found them appealing. Mm-hmm. They were compelling to her to start off with. But also there was that aspect of sort of a work ethic thing where you would take an idea and keep working on it. But some of them were just all around her. They're just the things that were around her. The road cones were just on the road all the time. And it's...
Rockets weren't.
The rockets weren't, no, but... Well, they weren't. But, I don't know, it's just one of those compelling images she latched onto. I'm not quite sure where that one came from. But road cones were, and road cones you would see as one of those things that are always around us and people don't think about. So she thought about them. She had sort of theories about them. They were sort of, they meant something, and she was exploring what that meant. There is an underlying, a road cone is either just a road cone sitting on a road or it's part of a bigger system going on. And most of us don't think about that. But if you're a visual artist who looks at this nice, bright, shiny orange thing in a green landscape, you do think about it. So,
It seems to me that often there's a fascination with distance in Jo's work. There's a distance in the representation of what you're looking at, and there's a distance in the way in which we as viewers encounter the work. Sometimes you can get it like this one here, the Tangihua Hills with the washing line. You can get it at 6 or 7 metres, but others you have to be a metre away or closer. And that wonderful delight that she has in playing with the ways in which you're never at the same distance from Jo's paintings as a viewer or in terms of what they represent. That's one thing that fascinates me, as well as the return of subjects. But even also the sense that she knows that scale has a lot to do with your perception of the symbols and what she's painting. So often, some of the very smallest works have some of the largest and most intense wallop to them, as if the miniaturist things, like it's really a case of physically less is psychically more.
I reckon most painters have a visual language and they develop that visual language over time. Some things stay, some things fade away. Like how most people get new clothes all the time, but some of you might have that Sweetwater's t-shirt from, that really good festival that year. So I think with the road cones, it's both a symbol of safety and protection, really, because when you see a road cone, it's either blocking you off from somewhere to keep you safe, or it's highlighting a danger. So I reckon that kind of got reused and reused again. And then some of her other ones, like her tape, it's pretty obvious in the tape. That one's reminding you of danger. But then some of the other road cones are friendly road cones. But it depends on the context of this big... And we see them every day. It's also that everyday sort of image. I mean, most of us, how many roadworks do you have, particularly on that road? She was always moaning about the amount of roadworks, but nothing ever seems to get done on the way out to her house. So. That's what I reckon it is. There's lots and lots of symbols in it you wouldn't even think twice about. I mean, you might think that that castle is a really realistic castle on a rock somewhere, but it could mean something totally different to the person who's painting it.
Yeah.
You just never know until you ask the person that's painting it.
Yeah.
But is that actually a necessary thing? Because do you just want to go to that painting and have the story that you're coming with from your life talking to that thing? Or do you actually want to know what the artist thought about when they painted it? It's a silent conversation. You don't have to ask, but it's right there for you. Is it a road cone? Is it not?
The everyday is never just the everyday, like our everyday. For Joe Hardy, the everyday is always and ineffably an extraordinary everyday.
I viewed that she probably had a multi-series of themes, and when she tired of one, she moved to another. And they were simple structures right up to very complex. Some of them political, some of them subversive, in a way that she would describe, with paint. Some people, might discover them, might not. It's always there. There's a level underneath the paint, through the design elements or the super realism, whatever you want to call it, magic realism. Is that the one? Where the image absolutely says more than just the visual idea. So, there's part of the viewer's influence on what they understand of this world, what they pick up of in her work.
Yeah, something that strikes me is that many of Joe's works incorporate reality, but also the dreamscape, or the experience, in an event in this plane perhaps, and they sort of all conflate into the one painting, which is quite interesting. I'm reminded of a beautiful quote that she discussed her work in terms of fleeting minutiae, and that's something that we considered when we were hanging this exhibition, was that we didn't want to thematize her exhibition, so the way we hung it was loosely chronological, but really we wanted to show that sort of relationship between how the elements sort of, what am I trying to say, that they feature throughout her entire oeuvre, as opposed to something that she focused on for a short period of time and then moved on. You see the jester, you see the clown suit, you see the road cone, you see the castle and the rocket ship, and they're features that the tent, the tenture, and then Heartbreak Hotel, that's 10 years later, I think, and there's that tent in there as well, so it's quite interesting. I think it's around 10 to 4, so I'll throw some questions out to the visitors if anyone would like to ask any of the panellists or all of us a question around Jo or her work. So I think Alice is going to come around with a microphone. You can take that one.
I do have a theory about the road cones, knowing that she had a sense of humour, that if you didn't wake up with one in the morning in your bed, you hadn't really had a good night out the night before. It could have been that.
I mean, it's all very speculative, really, isn't it? She gave me a painting before she passed away, and she wouldn't tell me what it meant. All she told me was, this is a reminder to stop choosing inappropriate men. And it has a lipstick and a rocket in it, and a suitcase that says, don't tip the air, or dusty airplanes, don't tip dusty airplanes or something. And I stare at it for ages and I go, I have no idea what you were on at this particular moment in time. But yeah, actually it has. No, it has. But I mean, that's part of, do we really need to know if it's a rocket? Do we really need to know if that road cone isn't a good night out? Kind of adds to it all, eh? I think that's what she'd want with her visual communication, her legacy, because we talked a little bit about her legacy before she went.
You could argue that painting is always the best way to articulate whatever it is she's saying. That there's almost no need to deconstruct it.
Yeah, if you have the
look at
visual
painting.
languages and the skills to do it, and she had both.
Yeah.
I think one of the legacies of Jo Hardy is that she had a 43-year career based in Northland, that she painted 662 works of art, of which over 100 are here, And if you think of the last time that this museum organised a show of this scale, of an artist who's one of the key artists of the region, it would have to be very many years. So congratulations, Ruth, and your team for doing this show.
Thank you.
And
Congratulations.
even more than that, I know that all of us will never forget seeing this show today. It's really very quelling, because for me, I'm so aware that Jo Hardy is one of our key artists in terms of realism, but also that the amount of hours, it's not hundreds of hours, folks, it's thousands and thousands and thousands of hours.
Why do you think it is that Jo wasn't more well known nationally?
You know, I was thinking about, you just said, why was Jo Hardy not better known nationally? Well, she gave to the community. Look at that art column that she did, was it for 15 and a half years?
Yeah.
That is one really major contribution that she's made to the infrastructure of visual arts and all forms of art in Northland. But I also thought about this word repudiation. She repudiated the art game. She repudiated, excuse me, not you personally, but the whole syndrome of art dealers. She wasn't interested in them. She wasn't interested in CV development. You know, I've just written one more thing this week, put it on the CV and Facebook it. She had a complete abhorrence for careerism. You know, there was no narcissism in her, there was no cynicism in her. So why did she not care? I don't know why she didn't care, because she could have had a much bigger reputation nationally if she'd wanted to play that game, but she was not a game player. She set her own rules. And that's something I think we should all really admire, because we now have to be advocates for the reputation and achievement of Jo Hardy.
I think she was an outsider. That's the term they use in contemporary fields. Even though she was a fine art painter, she was most definitely, from her personal perspective, an outsider. And she wasn't a game player for the art community, well, for a local art community, but not for the dealership idea. There was this issue about, always with Jo, with money, and rightly so. I mean, it's her work, and if someone wished to do the work to sell her work, then they're worthy of the sale and the commission they receive. But often I think Jo felt it didn't really work for her. She always used to set up her independent shows, and they functioned very well. I was really, well, Megan and I were hardly art dealers in that essence. We were more helpful friends. Because we didn't make any money off Jo, by the way.
It's a hard call. I've got my own theories about why artists in this town aren't appreciated in their own time. And then people wait until they've passed away, and then suddenly it becomes something. But this show was in the works while she was still alive. She had every intention of being here right up until it was pretty obvious that she wouldn't be. She had people, she knew the art game. She didn't like a lot of the game players. That's why she avoided that whole scene, you know. But she used to tell me both the times when, oh, you know, can you drop out some cigarettes on occasion? And I'd take her out some rolls. But then on the other side of it, oh, this Audi just pulled in and bought 4 of them and wants me to do 2 more. So it's that whole feast or famine thing with a lot of us. I mean, I could wax lyrical on about how the council does not appreciate its own artists, and how Whangarei people and Northland people think that the best art is in Auckland and Whangarei, so they wait until they've either, an artist has either cracked it down in the cities or overseas before they are considered something. People aren't necessarily looking at the talent or the hours behind it, because we have this warehouse mentality where we can go into a shop and spend $29.95 and it's a print of something else and they put it on the wall and that's fine. You know, you could say about how the woman's role in art has never really been as appreciated as the more masculine. You know, if you start thinking about all the top sellers in New Zealand art, historically it's never been a woman other than Rita Angus after she passed away. So a lot of us are left to sort of struggle away, just kind of like we have to prove through our struggle and our poorness that we're actually an actual artist, and then we have to do this big thing overseas as well, or die. And then we're considered to be, oh, I'll shell out some cash now. So that's my own little take on it. I felt sorry for her a lot of times when I'd go up there and she was struggling. because I thought, you're one of the best magical realists. I made the mistake of calling her a surrealist once. Oh, did I get it in the teeth? She said, no, I'm a magical realist. And she sort of explained it in the same way that Frida Kahlo did not like being called a surrealist either. You know, these aren't necessarily all just my dreams. They're my life. They just happen to you, they just happen to look surreal.
Jo wasn't a huge fan of labels, but I think she did, you know, appreciate magic realism. I remember when I first met Jo, my first encounter with Jo was when I was at the Print Trust, and I was helping sort out the archive there. This was around 2006, 2007, and so I met her prints before I saw her paintings, although the one behind here with the green man, the body politic, allegory 1, used to stare down at us, and I was always perturbed by that work for a while. But when I came into contact with Jo was when I was working at the art gallery as the assistant curator when we had the site at the Rose Gardens, and the then director Scott Pothen invited Jo to self-curate her show, so she was always really involved in exhibition making, and I worked with her on that exhibition. It was an absolute privilege to have close contact with her and to write a piece about her painting, which she read and edited but was very happy with. So I knew that she was quite harsh about that kind of thing. So yeah, she was an amazing painter, an amazing woman.
Can I just address that question? Sorry, of why she's not better known nationally.
Yeah.
Just to go back to that, just from my perspective, from what I observed, she did. By then, she had a lot of paintings, but she did paint quite slowly and meticulously. You know, some painters will make more quicker, and I think that's all about doing things on her own terms and in her own way. She wasn't really painting to create. She wasn't really painting to be a painter in someone else's eyes. She was very much painting because that painting was in her head, and she had to work on that. But that's not to say she didn't feel somewhat left out at sometimes. She did say to me that she felt like she could have been much more nationally recognised if she'd taken a different path earlier in her career. You know, she came up here to Northland and started painting Northland landscapes in what she called at the time a kind of an artistic wilderness. You know, it was so she did feel like that separated her from other centres where she could have been more recognised if she'd wanted to play that game, but as you all rightly said, she would never have done that. So she did sort of feel that that she wasn't quite recognised in the way that she felt she might have been, but I don't think she really, that wasn't a huge concern.
She didn't resent it.
No, she didn't resent it. She totally understood that, and it's the cliche, isn't it? Every artist is unknown until they're dead.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Well, I suppose really one of the challenges that comes about through this project, it seems to me, is which paintings by Jo Hardy will become a work of art that is in the collection of the Whangarei Art Museum. So as a curator from another place, I'm saying, so Ruth doesn't have to say it, that if you ever want to sign a deed of gift or promise gift to Whangarei Art Museum, this museum would be hugely grateful for your generosity in the future, should you consider this place as a home. And I say it, I believe it is a fitting home for Jo's work, just as it was for Adele Younghusband, who experienced the same thing half a century earlier.
Thank you, Ron.
Mum was quite proud to be exhibited alongside Rita Angus when that touring exhibition came, so you know, she did appreciate that sort of comparison.
She was once asked to become a member of the group in Christchurch when she was 18 or 19. But with regards to her production of her works, she considered the making of them the most important thing, the only important thing. She wasn't concerned with the rest.
She also knew what she liked, and she wanted to support the new ones coming through. Like, I didn't know that she'd followed me for a long time until I met her and we started talking, and then we became friends. Peter Larson, for, you know, all of his ups and downs, she supported him with his words and everything. It was always a touchstone for her. One thing we talked about, because Jo died around, when she died in July, we'd already lost about 4 other great Northland artists of a certain vintage, all in kind of a row, so there was a huge aching gap. So a lot of us did start thinking about what's our legacy when we hit the 60s. So for me as a painter, when I walk around this room, I'm trying to figure out how she did it, because what some people would call copying, I call like a tribute to her. I'd like to get an idea, particularly how to paint those waterscapes, you know, have a good look at how to do them. And if somebody comes across and says, oh, you're copying Jo, and I says, no, I am part of Jo's legacy. She was my mate, and she would have absolutely no problem with me trying to learn how to do, so I reckon anyway. We discussed it a little bit. Most artists want to pass something on. She was like that too. But like all of them, like Manos, Colleen, Jo, Peter and Tilly Gossage, none of them really thought that they were all going to take off. But the paintings are pretty immortal. I believe that too. Once I'm gone, the ones that I've got in museums all around the place, they'll last for 100 years after I'm gone. So I think she was quite happy about that.
Many of Jo's works are actually in private collections. The Whangarei Art Museum has Whangarei Landscape 2 Prime Care, which is just around the corner here. Alice, do you want to pop that one up? And we have that one painting which we love. It's incredible. Yeah, so thank you, Ron, for that gesture. Is there any other questions from the audience? No? No? Did anyone over here want to say anything more?
I love the woman. She was lovely. And once I get out there, we should all have a cheers before you fellas all go. I think she'd quite like that.
Yeah.
Look, I really believe that Jo supported up-and-coming artists, and she supported free thinking, untethered. She supported people who tried to really push the boundaries from the intellectual point of view with art, not necessarily painting. But she really fostered independent thinking.
She could spot an artist and she could spot a fake.
Yeah. So I think that was the best thing about Jo's isolation, and I think it worked for her, is that she developed her revoir, and it really started singing after many years of continuous work independently.
I have no doubt that Jo Hardy will be regarded as one of the finest realist painters of the last century. There's no question in my mind that that is the achievement that she already has, even though her works have not yet migrated necessarily into public care. They will do. I'm hugely encouraged by her achievement, but even more than that, I'm hugely encouraged by her incisive vision and her wonderful generosity as a human being. Jo Hardy, I'm one of everyone here who remembers you with aroha.
Thank you, everyone. It's wonderful to hear these points and comments around Jo's work. Please stay and look at the exhibition. We're taking the exhibition down on Monday, so this is your one and last only opportunity to see the work together. Feel free to help yourself to some more refreshments and enjoy the company of fellow friends. Just want to thank you for coming down and listening to this discussion panel. We finally have our catalogue, so please get yourself one of those. They're going for $8. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ruth, and thank you from Wham. Appreciate that. You've done a great job.